Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mortuary Mist. I am your host, Perished, aka Justin Mao, and today we have three guests coming on the show. First off, we have Justin Morales.
Yo, what's up?
Second, we have Ryan Sonoda.
Yeah, present.
And lastly, we have Bellaman Reject, Nicholas Lopez.
What's up?
Today we will be talking about the book Locked Down, Locked Out. It is a book about prison reform, it gives information on how prisms, lol, are destroying families and communities, making us all less safe. So let's just jump right into this. Starting off, can I get your guys' opinion on a quote stated by Jeremy Travis? This quote is basically saying or comparing how prisons are like the modern day auction block during slavery.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're weighing it in, there's the start point and an end point, I guess you could say. You know, prisoners start with their crime, and they go through this whole court trial thing, whole process. Slaves back in the slave trade block, the selling, they were all enslaved to begin with. Obviously, it has to be that process of enslaving people that are black, as it was back in the day. There's no filter to that, I guess. It's just how it was. They were then sold, shipped off, similar to prison, where they were arrested, convicted, and tried. You know, the destination for the African Americans who ended up becoming slaves in America were, you know, they came in a boat. They were landed here, and they were sold off to people, or specifically, you know, with no filter, to be real as it gets, to white people, wealthy white people in general, who had this work that needed to be done, and they were not willing to pay for anything. They just paid a slave. They just paid for a slave from the sellers. Sellers made bank. These people got slaves to do every work they could for them, and they had harsh punishments if they didn't do their work. You know, and same thing for prison. You know, you get convicted, you get the trial, you get sentenced to jail, and in jail they have these jobs. They have harsh labor similar to slaves. Not as hard as slaves, obviously. There are different punishments for both. There is no way to say they were this exact same thing, but they both started at a similar point of, well, we are going to take you based on either an action or a description of you, and then it's going to lead up to basically kind of the same endpoint of labor, and you know, just no pay and just kind of harsh treatment if you just fail on your labor.
Well, weren't slaves sold to do work? However, in prison, there's a reason you went to prison most of the time, unless you were obviously wrongfully convicted, right?
Yeah, for instance, like you said, slaves, they were not meant to do work, similar to prisoners. Prisoners were not meant to do work. They committed a crime and are simply serving time, but their time should not have to be harsh, you know, harsh work. Similar to like slavery, right? They were just sold off. You know, they weren't made for work. They were just like, hey, you're black. I don't like the fact that you're black, so you're gonna do all this work for me. Criminals, I don't like that you're a criminal. You're gonna do harsh work for me. Obviously, old standards of like picking cotton fields, doing all this work, running all this stuff. It's way different to today, where it's like making products without being paid. You know, what else was it? It's like it's doing all this different stuff. You know, community service pickup. It's different stuff, but at the end of the day, it's still like they didn't volunteer to do this work. They were forced into it based on a description or a feeling on them. For slavery, you know, they just felt, hey, you're black. We don't really like that. And for criminals, they're like, hey, you committed a crime. Now you're gonna do this harsh labor for me.
Well, I can understand that, like, if they're wrongfully committed. However, if it was them committing a crime, and especially if it was, like, a really bad crime, like, for example, a bank robbery plus charges of murder or whatever, like, to, let's say, the third degree or whatever it's called, then a little bit of work, in my mind, I could see that as just.
Yeah, well, that's all. It just really just depends on the circumstances, to be completely honest. Obviously, if you're being tried on murder and you're on a life sentence, you kind of earned it. You kind of just like, hey, you did this. You took a soul away. You took a life away. I don't think harsh labor is going to cost you. But if let's say you just rob a bank in general, let's say you just needed money, and your last solution was, hey, I'm going to rob this bank. Like, you would have been doing work either way for money. You either would have worked at a job for money, but you would have agreed. You would have come to like mutual terms, like, hey, I'm going to work for this job to get this money. But if you go to prison, you're doing forced work. They provide you with basic necessities, but when you do their work, you're not being paid. It's obviously understandable when there's a crime that is really really bad, and the least they can do is just do work. But when it's a crime that's like just a learning lesson, something you just want to grow out of, something that's just caused by social issues around your area, I feel like that's where it's kind of harsh work just doesn't work out. Same thing with slavery. These people were, I don't know the background of where their location was, but they were sold off, and they're in this country. White people see this country at the time as, oh wow, these colonies, they're nice. These colonies are really nice. We're settling, we're having all this stuff, and then they have slaves, and those slaves, coming from a background of wherever they come from, are just doing work because they're forced into it. Similar to lower crimes, people that commit lower crimes are forced into doing work at prisons, even though their crime was just minor. That they had motivation for it, obviously, because you don't just commit crimes out of no motivation. However, if you have motivation for murder, that is where something was definitely wrong, and work is just definitely deserved.
Sage.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I sort of agree with your point there. But I also see it as like, so say, because like it's obviously like sort of a community kind of thing. If you're doing, it's called community service for a reason. Like, say you kill someone, right? You you're taken away from your freedom is taken away from you, and you're sent to prison. But on top of that, now you have to give back to the community by doing tasks or doing stuff that will directly benefit the community. Like, I'm pretty sure the government or some part of the government um, released this hand sanitizer for coronavirus. But the thing with it is it was made by prisoners in prisons. So their uh, their labor was actually, for the greater good. It was what's the word? It was good. Yeah, it was
It's giving
beneficial.
back.
However,
Oh yeah, keep going.
uh, that's kind of actually all I had to say.
Yeah,
Build.
so basically, you bring up a good point with the hand sanitizer, but when you start off with like murder, community service is something voluntary you do. You don't always give consent to that. Prisoners never give consent to that. I'd understand the crime, but community service isn't that big of a burden. I'm talking about like those harsh punishments where like I've seen some of those clips of just some of those really bad prisons, and they're doing some pretty harsh things in there. Um, it just kind of begins to like be hard to explain. And some of those tasks are no easy tasks at all, and it's something that you just sometimes you never deserve to do. I understand if they put the murderers, those people that rob family members and loved ones from each other, those are people that should definitely be doing those kind of things. They kind of deserve it. But when you're minor crime, nothing that harmed anybody in like scale of death or major life-threatening injury, on a scale, it basically just depends on a scale, really. The hand sanitizer, I understand if they made every prisoner do that. If you're in jail and you're not being released because of COVID, you might as well do yourself a favor and other people a favor in your community. You know, give back to the community you may have hurt. But in some cases, some of these punishments are just harsh, and sometimes they're just not deserved based on their crime. It's not really helping determine or for a person to build off of their past, really.
But
Yeah. I agree with that point on how there's some like unjust forms of labor, and it's like unjust. It all comes down to what people see as justice. Like is like I feel like hard labor, like stuff that they hired for professionals to do. Um, I feel like those definitely should not be a norm for prisons, due to like because that.
when you said
Yeah.
And also
building
on that note, oh yeah, keep going.
building off your point where you say professionals like prisoners shouldn't be hired or forced to do work like professionals. That brings us to what is like that happened like a few weeks, which could be happening currently, but they were using prisoners to help firefighters to fight the fires, but most of the time they aren't getting like their sense knocked off or anything. They're getting promised, but most of the time it doesn't actually happen. So it's just free labor for the government. So they're just using them. So yeah.
Yeah, and there was a story coming up this week as well, building off of that, where it was a firefighter immigrant, basically, volunteered, did work, and was just deported directly afterwards, And I feel like deportation, like the deportation system, you could even say that's more harsh than the real prison system, but they align together. And, I feel like if you're really helping out a community and you're helping the country be a better place in terms of like natural disasters, I feel like being deported directly after for doing that, maybe you should just be given an opportunity because you're really just helping out the country. But it's really harsh that you have to go through firefighter work, something that's not easy at all, for free as well, on your own voluntary thing, and they just send you right back to your country. That's just
Well, back to the firefighter prison thing. Like, let's say you're in prison for X amount of time and you never get to go outside of that prison, maybe the little courtyard or whatever they have there. And then you finally get presented with the opportunity to maybe go help with your community or help the firefighters. Like, would you take it or would you just continue chilling there, in your little cell?
well, that really actually depends because, like in the immigration story, the guy was promised a chance if he went to go help. That's what happens to most of these people. Most of these people would not do a thing. But some of them are forced into it. Obviously, like I said, depending on their sentence, some people deserve to just be forced into things because they've done something harsher. But in some cases, people are like, "Hey, if you help these wildfires, we'll give you less of a sentence, or we'll just release you immediately." If you're in the deportation system, like a ton of like ICE customs people that were in there, they were allowed to go fight the fires, and they were all told, "Hey, we'll give you an opportunity if you do this." And turns out they were not giving an opportunity. They just got free labor. Did not pay them a cent for potentially stopping such a big disaster that could have burned an entire state, maybe even three of them. And they just said, "Hey, you guys are just gonna go back. Some of you guys are gonna get deported. Some of you guys are just gonna go back to prison." Nothing happened because it's all about money as well. Prisons lose money. ICE loses money if you release people. If you just do that like that, they gain money from you staying in with them. It's just called
Yeah,
like government help.
yeah, and just to make like a quick comment about the immigration system and like what it takes to become a citizen in the United States. My friend's dad was actually an immigrant and still is. Um, and he said that it is extremely hard and is very very hard to become a citizen in the United States. So if you were given the chance to do that, then it would you know it would they would take it up instantly.
Yeah, exactly. It's like my parents are both immigrants as well. My dad came here, made the best of his situation. He was never offered anything. I think he was caught once, but he came here. He did great. He was never in any trouble. Same thing with my mother. They met together. They were never in any trouble. So obviously now they're having their permits to be here. They're legally here now. Thank God. But obviously it starts off bad. Some people got to earn their opportunity. Other people, you just got to be a clean person. Obviously if you're doing something to end up in prison and you're presenting an opportunity, you got to take that. But to end up in prison to begin with puts that on your criminal record. Like for my parents, clean criminal record. They were granted what they needed. But for some people it's different. And when you're offered, a position to fight fires in some case after you're a criminal, after you're detained, after you're caught, and you're promised, hey, freedom. Yeah, we'll consider giving you like a working permit. We'll let you build a life here, and they don't do that. That is where it's just unfair. It's lying. It's just why would you say that? Like people would not
Yeah, it's just
volunteer
lying.
because they would either force you or they would bribe you into it. And obviously, forcing you at this point, people already know the harshness of forcing you. So if they can just get that alibi of saying, hey, you volunteered, but they never mentioned the offer, then that really just makes them look better. But in reality, it's not like that.
Bringing
Yeah. I
go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say I completely agree with what Nick said.
Oh, okay. So bringing the topic back to comparing prisons to the modern day version of the slave auction block. Yeah, that word. Um, I I feel like more like people of color, like Asians, African Americans, or like the quote unquote ghetto is more policed than like actual like neighborhoods, because not basically off their skin color, but I feel like because there's like a nasty stereotype built around these people, like they're more likely to commit crime or something based off the statistics. But like, yeah, how do you guys feel about that?
Based off of,
I don't know.
yeah, it's also
Uh,
based off of like
I've seen.
past experiences.
Yeah, was like the question like how I feel about the stereotypes of
It's
um
it's
people of color being in prisons.
I'm saying that African Americans in general are more likely to be incarcerated as compared to whites, like how African American people were slaves because they were forced to. But do you feel like because of the slavery, the it uprooted for like the communities of African Americans and black people to have like systematic quote unquote racism?
The I'm not sure about that. S- I mean, I guess it just really comes down to statistics. Um, at the end of the day, uh, uh, someone else want to go? I need to think.
Yeah, and it's also like past and basically what was left off from the previous generations. There's been a lot of those communities that are now like as you say over policed that had previous generations of people of color committing crimes, and now you come into these places and now obviously these crimes are more reported because there's more police there. It's not I'm not saying white crimes don't go unreported. But I'm saying they either might take longer or it might take a little bit. They just sometimes they don't go unreported, but there's they get reported either way. But it's quicker to report somebody in a ghetto neighborhood because there's always police patrolling those. Coming from a semi kind of semi bad neighborhood, there's always police driving at least every 15 minutes through the street, every block. So there's no way you can just get away with something there. And I guess it's just how it is. And if you try to get away with something there, there's no way you do. It's just how it is with those kind of communities based
Yeah.
on previous generations and who was established there. And, I guess they just use previous statistics to just say, hey, previous people that were here are now being raised here by people that were here before. And those people do not leave a good mark. But obviously things change, and it's not always like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So wrapping up this topic, uh, we go to is let's see. Okay. Would you guys say prisons are quote unquote visitor friendly?
Uh, well, in terms of visitor friendly, like the whole thing about prisons is they're not. I mean, at least the ones we have here, they're not like built to look like a good place to go. Like when you like Google an image of a prison, or if you can go see one, it'll be like gray walls or just like brick, like sometimes it'll look dirty. There'll be like iron bars, like iron doors, like with people inside of them or behind those doors, and it just doesn't seem like a place you want to go. Like I'm not even sure if they provide you bedding in some cases. The whole point, I feel like the whole point of like a prison, or at least in I guess the government's eyes, is to like make it seem like if you commit crime, you're gonna go here. You do not want to go here, so do not commit the crime. Um, but that could also have some downsides because people in prison, especially like in worst cases, like wrongly convicted people, um, they get like traumatized in prison, um, and it's it, it could be bad for them mentally.
Yeah, and obviously, nobody really wants to deal with that, and nobody really wants to go to prison to visit somebody. It's always an unfortunate situation when you have to take time of your day and say, hey, you have to tell people, I need to go to prison because someone that I know is needed of a visit from me. And unless you're going to Alcatraz, you do not want to go tour a prison because trust me, those things they're not great. You walk down, there's going to be some big scary dudes in there, some criminals, definitely convicted of some really bad crimes, and obviously, like you said, there's trauma for those that are wrongfully convicted. And also, it could be trauma for basically everybody involved, every party involved, parents, loved ones, children too, children that maybe their fathers, mothers go to prison, and it's never a good thing to see that trauma goes both ways. And it's just not visitor friendly because you do not want to walk in there and see all those dudes. And the same thing with like the whole communications that they have. They're all so close together. Your conversation's recorded, no privacy. It's just not that good of a place to visit, and you just gotta hope that you don't have to.
Do you have a say in this, Ryan?
Oh, I feel like prisons aren't really that visitor friendly, mainly because, in my opinion, I think prisons are built to keep people in for their wrongdoing, not to make it like some grand thing when someone, for example, comes and visits. Yes, most of the time they are family or loved ones or people who knew each other, maybe even friends. However, at the end of the day, I don't know the actual percentages, so I'm making this up because it sounds nice. Like 90% of the time, probably they're in there for an actual reason, versus then wrongfully committed or convicted. So I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, and a ton of those unconvicted ones, there's never proof. For some of them, they're just convicted, and they just go unnoticed. They just never go with any evidence, and that's just how it is sometimes. The statistics are never really known because you never really know if it's true or not. Some people know it deep down in their hearts. A lot of people know it, but the real reason people to the public will never be known unless somebody speaks up. And a lot of people in prison right now probably know that they're innocent, but they were just either determining by their skin color. Happens sometimes, it happens, or on other circumstances, maybe the juries just thought you were acting a little bit suspicious and coarse. Maybe people didn't you didn't look like a good person, so they're like, hey, we think you're guilty of it, and that system really doesn't help people cope with having to go through this stage in that kind of way.
yeah. And in terms of this prison, like visitor friendly, like there's um, like visitor would obviously be either like friends and family, um, and just like a family member in prison in general is just like a horrible thing to experience, um, because it's like you've like if it's like a deep family member you've trusted that person for a long time, and seeing them in prison is just like a huge just like uh uh what's the word, just like I don't know what's the word, I want to say wake up call, but that's not it. Just like huge reveal on how bad that person really was
Like
secretly.
it's exposure. I guess you could say it's exposure.
Yeah, and it sometimes it hurts people really bad. And so then and say they're wrongly convicted and you know it, or that you feel like they're wrongly convicted, and you go to visit them in prison and you see their condition. Obviously, I don't think they're gonna look happy. I mean, well, I guess they'll be happy if they see you, but they're not happy in there. Um, I'm pretty sure they have them like behind like a glass wall of some sorts. And it's just like even you're right there, but they're still showing you that this person's locked out from the world. They will not, they will not. They're not allowed freedom for however long they're in there. Um, and that could really mess up some people.
Yeah, the isolation, to see some family member in isolation. It like the visitor friendly thing doesn't just apply to like the setting. It obviously applies to the feelings and how you feel mentally about the situation as well. Some place could be a really nice decked out place. You could see it nice. Everything looks nice. All of it's remodeled, but if you walk in with a really bad feeling, it's gonna feel really unfriendly and really unsettling. And I guess that's where you come in. You gotta come in both physically feeling well and also mentally. Mentally is probably the bigger part.
I don't know if you guys have seen the TV show, TV series, The Flash, but when Barry Allen actually goes to visit his father most of the time, in the waiting rooms, there's no bathrooms, which is yeah. And whenever he's actually talking to his father, like the camera, you can see him looking back and forth at the cameras and seeing like how all the conversations are being recorded, just like how in actual prisons are. But yeah, I feel like most of the people that like have to go back and forth to to visit, it's not really visitor friendly because most of the time uh the prisoner is taken like hours away from their family, and like the families have to spend money and like for the traveling and like food to get there. And yeah, and most cases you actually have to pay to get in and talk to the prisoner. So yeah.
Yeah, and just like as a final comment on this, that actually reminded me of we've actually like seen that, even though it was a movie. We watched a movie in class about a person who was wrongly convicted and was in prison, but it was more of like the outsiders rather than him in prison himself. And near the end of the movie, I think he's allowed a meal, like a final meal, but like he walks into the room and he's completely cuffed. He's chained, and then his I think it was mother um, asked the sheriff why he's in chains, and she was crying. She was completely heartbroken to see her son locked up like this. Um, so as she was visiting him, and that is definitely not a visitor friendly, sort of thing to see. See a very loved one chained up like an animal.
Yeah, and as sad as it is, it's kind of the reality. Even if it was a movie, they wouldn't just make a movie like that, make the prison system look really bad, unless it's actually bad, in which case it is. And that's just how harsh it is, and that's what they made it be. They made it light the truth that hey, this prison system, it's this harsh.
Yeah, like the reality.
Any last comments before we wrap up this topic and move on to the next?
No, we can move on. I'm pretty sure this. Yep.
All
Yeah,
right.
that's all I had to say.
Pineapples.
All right. So I'm gonna state this statistic. And I want you guys to tell me how do you feel about it, and yeah, just in general. For 4 to 7 women actually go to prison while they are pregnant. And most of the time, do you feel like if they if and there's no statistic recorded on the availability of abortions in prisons, do you feel like they should have access to that?
4 to 7 out of what? 10? 100?
47% of women.
So 4 to 7. So 4 out of 100
Oh.
to like 7 out of 100. 4 to 7% out of the ratio of 100.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you guys feel like abortion should be an availability for a pregnant woman?
Well, it really depends on the circumstances. Sometimes you don't want to raise a kid in jail because there's cases. So there's two scenarios. Obviously, there's the scenario where you get your child taken away, or there might be three actually. The scenario where you get your child taken away, child protection services, adoption, out of there. You lose your child, and this kind of the same as abortion. You would lose your child either way, except in the child protection services case, the child actually lives a life. But with the abortion case, the child does not live a life, and instead it's just taken away from you based on your own choice. And obviously, it could be something that you could say or really argue that should be available to women because sometimes women do not want to go through the pain of delivering birth in general, but in prison where they're not giving proper, the proper living things, or there barely are, depending on where you are. It really just it gives you this unsettling feeling of giving birth. And with the third one, it could also be they take your child away, and if nobody adopts it, or they choose to save for you, if you've done good, you have good behavior reports in prison, they could gift it, or not gift it, but well, give you custody of the child afterwards. But obviously, when you go in with this like criminal record, that's really unlikely. And most of the time, they'll just leave you out to your child out to dry if you don't abort it. And that's why abortion should be a thing that should be a thing. You know, like one of my friends, his dad went to jail, his mother abandoned him, and luckily his grandma was willing to take him in. Sad story. He doesn't like to talk about it, but it's like the thing you got to realize is if he was lucky enough to be with his grandma and his aunt, both really wonderful women raising him in the right path, and obviously his father, a murder, he's in jail rightfully, evidence for all 5 cases, and so obviously that's his case. I'm not going to get into much details, but in this scenario, she was not given an option to abort, and what I'm hearing from grandma, which I had to call for this podcast specifically, is the mother wanted abortion, but the prison said she could not have it, and she's Latina, by the way. Whether that has an impact on her or not, it is just that they told her not to get one. So it's either he was just never born at all, and they were going to send him to child protection services, but it just didn't happen. You know, the mother was in custody with the father at one point, because they suspected of both of them, but he was given birth in prison, and then his mother was released because they found nothing on her, but his father was obviously kept in prison. And luckily his grandma was there, but you know, it's kind of that unsettling situation where you sometimes you want the abortion, but you just can't get it because they're not giving you that human thing of, hey, we're just going to make you have this baby and it's going to go wherever it goes. It either goes to a family member, goes to somebody random, or we just take it and give it back to you. But obviously when you abandon the child, that's a whole different situation, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, like the whole like should like women be allowed abortions in prison? There's really like two things with that question. First, it's like the argument between like pro-life and pro-choice, or whatever it is. And then the second is, do they even have the resources to get an abortion in prison? Now, the first one is a very controversial topic. The whole thing with pro-life is like when you're getting an abortion, you're taking away a life. You're basically, it's almost like you're committing murder, but I guess in a more humane way. You're taking someone's life at the end of the day. And a lot of people take that not very well and see that as very wrong. But on the other hand, pro-choice, the mother has the choice to keep her baby or take away her baby. Like sometimes, and especially in a prison setting, they like depending on how long they're in there, what they did, how good of a mother they are, they may very want to abort their baby due to it not having a place to go, or they think it will not live a good life. And sometimes they want to keep it and have it, with someone else, keep it safe.
Yeah, and with the pro-life, it's obviously like this whole situation of, well, we don't want this, and there's always the argument for pro-lifers that like, why do you guys call, like, to pro-choicers, obviously, it's always this argument where they're like, why is when you kill a pregnant woman, it's a double homicide? That's a whole different thing. But the other thing is that's kind of like a moral thing. Your moral is, hey, I want people to live. But on the pro-choice side, it's, hey, I want to give women choice because you never know. This is a whole different topic, it's a whole different controversy. You never know if it was like consensual. You never know if it was rape. But it's always like this thing where it's like that the past of how you got pregnant. Once you get into prison, that doesn't matter. It really just depends on what you want and whether the prison has resources for either you to raise the baby or for you to either abort it. And in some cases, it's neither. Sometimes you don't have the resources to abort it, and sometimes you also don't have the resources to raise it. You just kind of got to go with whatever you got to give it.
Yeah.
On the rare circumstance that the baby is born and family members do take in the child, when the mother or the person that has given birth to the child gets out of prison and wants to meet with their child, it is actually harder to build a bond because you guys are like meeting as total strangers. Because when they are born when the mother is in the prison system, the mother's actually only given 24 to 38 hours of time spent with their child before they are sent off directly back to prison. Ryan, do you feel like the time, like 24 to 38 hours, is enough connection time for like the baby to have a memory of their mother?
No, I think at that point, what's even the point? Because that's maybe 1.5 days, if even. Babies don't even really remember things like until they're maybe what 2, unless you have an impeccable memory or something. But yeah, I don't think it's enough. I think either like give them more time or just I almost want to say none. However, I feel like even then the mothers would probably cherish that time in their mind, even that in that small amount of time that they had together. It might not have been that big of an impact on the baby's life, but for the mother, it probably was most likely probably a big impact on their life. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously it's just depending on the willingness of the mother, of the birth giver. It's honestly just the willingness. If they're willing to, if they willingly and will like spend time with them before they're either taken away. I gotta plug my computer in. My bad. Sometimes it's just that willingness that they have to have, or that they just don't have. And if it's the willingness that they want to meet their child, they should definitely be given that right. If they're not given the right to abort it. But if they are given the right to abort it and they want to take it, because it's their choice, that's a whole different thing. But if they are not given that right and they don't think, hey, we don't want to raise it in prison, but you don't know if you'll ever see it again, you don't know about the bonds, you don't want to have to start a conversation at home later on in the child's life that, hey, I was a prisoner when you were born, I am your real mother. Sometimes you just don't want to start that. Like in the case of my good friend, his mother actually came back recently, but he has nothing. He doesn't want anything because she left him obviously after the whole prison thing. But it really just depends over the child, how they were raised, um, and obviously what hands you put him in. But it's really difficult to build a bond with somebody and immediately call them mother, call them daughter, call them son, call them father, whatever title they have, after you just have never seen them for like 4 to 10 years of your life. And it's devastating. It definitely is. And if they're willing to give the time, they should definitely do it. But if they're if they're not gifted their abortion, that if they want that to begin with, and that should definitely be a thing.
Yeah. Sometimes you're gonna have like it's probably the best option probably to give up that child or something because you don't want that child raising in a prison lifestyle or something. So it might be the best thing. However, if I was in that child's position, I'd probably be on the side of probably not wanting to call hypothetically if this were to happen to me that random person, random woman showed up and was like, "I'm your mother." I probably wouldn't want to call her my mother because I've never seen her. However, I wouldn't know that that was the only option like she had because she probably wanted a better life for me hypothetically.
Exactly. You also have to incorporate the fact that your mother, parent, guardian was a criminal, and you don't always want that under you. You don't always just want the title of having to set yourself with, hey, my birth giver, my mother, the woman that is important, that was supposed to be important in my life, was a criminal, and that is the reason why I didn't see her. It's hard to forgive. It really is. It's hard to put that reputation on your child that, hey, your mother was a criminal and you were not raised by me. Now we have to build this bond out of nowhere. It's hard.
I want.
Yeah, I
Go
feel
ahead.
like it's almost. I feel like it almost comes down to the point of like, if you're not, again, depending on how long you're in there, and actually it's kind of just rephrasing what you guys said, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's it's almost like why even bother if you're not going to see them for a very long period of time, and in that period of time where it's crucial, you need to make a bond with your baby. Um, but you're stuck in prison, and the best you can do is like visit them every once in a while. Um, and they're going to be stuck with like a family member or someone else, and you can't make that bond because you're in jail. And it's like you're not the mother.
All right.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like that's why abortion should be a choice in the first place, because that's everything that's taken into consideration is, do I want to build a something with my child later, or do I want to raise him in prison with me with no resources? Like, it's gonna be tough, and there's gonna be no trust pretty much, because I assure that if any of us were in the situation of, hey, my parents got out of jail because they're a criminal and they wouldn't raise me in jail with them, would you trust them? Would you trust based on giving the background of, hey, they chose to have you, they left you, and they're criminals, they're coming back to you now? Would you trust that?
I probably wouldn't trust it, but I mean, I I'm not in that situation, so technically I have no right to say this. However, I feel like I probably won't trust them. However, I'd at least give them that first, and if it goes well, maybe even that second and third and so on chances. You know?
Openness of both parties. But I mean, all this conversation would, if women obviously had the resources to get an abortion, and if they had the choice to do it at every single time, this conversation would just be abolished. It would just be down to, does the woman want an abortion or not, and if she doesn't, then
Yeah.
circumstances are adoption. But if they're not, if they want the abortion, they're not able to get it. This is where the conversations start to go like, hey, now this whole process needs to go down because you are not giving the resources that could just avoid this conversation.
I totally agree with that. Um, straying away kind of from the prison topic, but how Planned Parenthood, or is being defunded, is like taking away like free healthcare for like many teenagers and like other adults that just don't have the money to pay for like to go to doctors for like their needs. I feel like since it's prisons and it's government funded, I feel like they should have like every single resource open to like their prisoners, right?
You see, but that's where the problem starts is the more prisoners you have, the more money you're going to need, obviously, to house them. The government and the prisons know this. They know, hey, if we have more prisoners, we get more money from the government, but their strategy is maybe we just provide them with the bare minimum. The prisons get more money, which is basically just owners' money, runners' money, foundations' money, all this stuff that goes towards other people, not the prisons. So if they just deny abortions, they get more people in prison, and they get to say, hey, we need money for this person's resources, but they're not going to give them resources, or they're just going to give them very bare minimum, really crappy services, and they're going to say, hey, that's all we got for you. But let's put this $50 a day for each person. That's reality. Let's say that's a thing, but they only want to provide you with $5 of stuff every day. All right, screw it. $45 goes to our foundation, our people that are running the prisons from the government, and $5 goes to you every day. But you know it's just $5. You think we're providing you with good stuff and as much as we get for you. It's more of like a money, financial, beneficial thing, basically, and
Yeah.
it's played out for just financial, economical reasons, pretty much.
Yeah. So, kind of going past the abortion part to like when the child has grown up without the mother, according to the American Psychological Society, they state that kids whose parents are incarcerated are more likely to engage in quote unquote criminal activity. Do you feel like this statement is true or false whatsoever?
Depends as who is raising them afterwards. I can speak to you obviously from my friend's perspective. He's a clean kid because he was raised by his grandmother and his aunt, uh, niece, whatever you want to call it. I keep forgetting their titles. Grandma's definitely in there for sure. He is not raised by any men at the moment. That's kind of an important topic, kind of not, but they put him in the right path. I guess you could really say it depends. There's criminal records of these young kids, these teenagers, committing crimes because they don't have their mother. They're being told, hey, your mother's a criminal, your father's a criminal. Just follow their footsteps. You don't have a future, you know. And it was an experience in the classroom for me as well. At one point where we were in there and friends, one of my classmates, well, we can say his father was in prison, serving little time, not much, and they're just being not doing their work, and they're like, "You're gonna end up like your father." It's a deepening insult that makes people want to just say, hey, that's my expectations. That's where I'm going to go. And I get at the end of the day, it just depends on who's raising them and who's putting them in their mentality.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you about who's raising them afterwards. Like, if the person raising them afterwards is like complete, really just like dissociated of whatever their parent is in prison for, I feel like depending on their background and how clean they are, then they probably won't get influenced by their parent to, who's in prison to do crimes. But sometimes, uh, you know, I really don't have much talking ground on this. I don't have much experience. I've never even had a friend who's been in the prison system before, so I no, I can't really talk about this topic too much. I understand what you're getting at in like the following the footsteps part, because if that's your parent, then that that's your blood. That's you basically. So you really want to follow through with what they did, and in that case, it would be committing crimes or going to prison. I guess that's what you have to do.
Yeah, and exactly. It also just depends on who's teaching you these things. So obviously, if people's expectations based on your parents is, hey, your parents were criminals. My expectation for you as a criminal, they're going to take those expectations and say, screw it. It depends on what society, the roles of society give to these people as expectations, and who's also raising them in the same sense as who's telling them, hey, don't do this, follow good footsteps, or who's just being like, hey, you're expected to do this because of your past or your parents' past, so we don't care. It depends on what approach people take towards these children that were not given the opportunity for their mothers to abort or anything other like that. It just depends on what household setting they're in, depends on their community setting, and who they're surrounded by, and what they're expected to do based on their surroundings, and if it's a positive or toxic.
Yeah.
Any last comments on this topic before we move on?
Uh,
I'm pretty
no,
sure
I
at
don't think
least
so.
one or if not both my parents have been in prison for things. I'm not gonna get into it, but that's why there's a lot of things that I don't do today because I don't want to end up how they did. One of them just barely getting their stuff together. The other one, well, I'm not allowed to see, so it's because of that as to why I don't do or try not to do a lot of things. I try to stay out of things most of the time. Depends on what it is, but it's because I don't want to end up like them or something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another good point. It's a really short point. It's not like a long conversation point, but it really depends on how the child approaches it as well. If they approach it as, well, my parents did this, I think I should do it too, or whether you're like, hey, my parents did this, but their results and what they experience, I don't think I want that experience for myself. And who's around them to tell them their mentality, what their mentality should be like. For example, Ryan is probably on a good path right now. He knows not to do the things his parents did. He did not want to go into it. That is perfectly fine. He's probably in that mindset of not doing it because maybe his parents told him it's harsh, it's not easy, it's not a good situation to be in. Or maybe he just knows by common sense that, hey, if your parents did it and they're trying to put you in a better path, maybe it's because they don't want you to do the same things because they just did not go well for them.
Yeah. Are you gonna talk, right?
Huh?
Oh, okay. Yeah, like I said, I don't really have much talking ground on this. Really, the only thing I have that kind of relates to this is just my relationship with my dad. Like, early in my life, he wasn't really there, and I've seen some stuff, but I'm pretty sure he's been to prison before. But I don't even think it was like when I was around. I don't even think I was born, or if I was really little, so it didn't really affect me at all. And my mom hasn't. So yeah, like I said, I really don't have any say in this topic. I don't know.
All right, moving on to the next and last topic, we're gonna be talking about kind of relating to the if women should be allowed abortion if they were pregnant in prisons. We're gonna be talking about the rights of prisoners and should they be allowed to vote. So, yeah, I'll kick this off, but I personally think that like prisoners should be allowed to vote, but like as a dissociated group So it doesn't count as like a state vote for like the electoral college or something like that, but it like more like of a population vote. So yeah.
Yeah, and the way state votes work is based on population. The more population you have, the more representatives you have of your state, and the more representatives you have is basically your electoral college numbers. So obviously, if you take the prison population, just like they do the state populations, you add that up to like the 51st a say and vote, I guess you could say. I guess you put it as like a prison thing, yeah. Um, I guess if you do that, that makes it so it's like you don't associate it with normal people votes. I'm not saying these people aren't normal people, but to not go into so much details of naming, we're just gonna call them in a different situation people, right? So from the normal people in their states, they're clean people. They vote. They do their thing. That's that. And prisoners all around the country, there's two ways to approach it really. It's either whether you commit the crime, maybe your community is terrible and you want to vote to help your community, maybe you want to be represented in that, or you could be a part of the entire prison population based on the amount of prison. It could either be like the 3/5 compromise where it's like, hey, not all prisoners are going to count for a full vote, so maybe 3 out of 5 of you guys will count. That would be inhumane. Or you could just say, hey, your population's like, let's throw some random number out. Like the prison population is 2 million. The population of San Jose is 1 million. So put it as obviously the prison population is way higher than 2 million. But if you look at like states like Montana, really low populations, you could probably put it up there with like a few electoral votes and represented, and based on who majority party is in the prison system, who they vote for more based on who they think will help them more in the prison system to get more reform, more of what they want, more of what they need. Maybe then you could kind of just count that in there as like, hey, these people deserve a vote, but in their own separate branch, because maybe not all of them agree with things that are made for the people that aren't in prison.
Yeah, about the. Oh, you can go.
No, you can go ladies first. I mean, Justin's first.
Okay. Well, on the topic of letting prisoners vote, voting is a right, obviously. And prison is there to take away rights. Like I mentioned before, freedom. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to do a lot of stuff in prison. Because you've showed people that you're not allowed to do these kind of things, or you shouldn't have access to these kind of things. But if you were like in your state, based on how many people are in prison, if they're enough to sway the vote, then that should be accounted for, because that would be that would be very impactful. It would show it better represents the state as a whole, and why they're voting for who. So I think under certain circumstance, I don't know. It kind of just seems like an all or none sort of thing. I don't know too much about voting, considering I can't vote, but um, I don't know. I think all prisoners should be allowed to vote because they're still. I mean, they're still citizens, right? Well, most of them are still citizens. So if they're a citizen, even if they're locked up in a cell, they should be allowed to vote.
Exactly. And a short comment onto that before I let Ryan speak is obviously doing a crime does not make you less American. And obviously to vote, you need to be over 18, and you also need to have a citizenship. Not hard things to do as long as you are under that. Obviously, it's hard if you're like an immigrant and you get in prison. Maybe then that's like a whole disqualification. You need to follow the laws of the voting thing, obviously. So you can't just vote because you're in prison. You also have to have like a citizenship, be over 18, obviously. Juvenile hall can't vote. But like I said, committing a crime does not make you less American, less whatever nationality you are, and that should be taken into account in voting. Voting is like an American thing. Americans want to see change. They want to see what they want to see in office. And committing a crime does not make you less American. It does not degrade, your opinions. It just degrades your humanity. Just degrades who you are as a person, your reputation. But your reputation should not affect your voting and your rights in general.
Well, to be an American, wouldn't you have to be human first?
Well, I mean,
I mean,
obviously everybody's a human.
Yeah.
Except for animals,
what's the
obviously, but like
definition of
for us.
human? Like, at what point?
Okay, that's
Like,
irrelevant. Anyways,
in my
so
opinion, I think the definition of
look,
human. Well, okay,
to
continue.
vote in the prison system, obviously, there's going to be restrictions like having an American citizenship. Obviously, everybody who wants to vote in America has to have an American citizenship. Some form of American identification saying you are allowed to be here. You also need to be over 18, obviously. And I'll rephrase what I said about the less humanitarian thing. It makes you less of a like humane person, I guess. Not less human, just less humane. Like in sense of thinking like in humanity, what is just, what is moral. I guess it doesn't always end up like that, but obviously it will definitely degrade your reputation, but your reputation should not affect your rights, and your reputation should definitely not affect your status as like an American voter.
Going off the topic of degrading reputation, how do you feel when, so like offenders, when they get released from prison and they like go home, they're they're like always beat down by like their society or their community to be like, you are this offender, you did this. It's always about like their past and not what they're going to do. So it's always a reminder of what they did and what they went through the prison system, building on their trauma if they did receive any. And yeah, I feel like the right to vote would keep like some stability in the human mind, that you're still part of a society and like you're still part of like a human group, instead of like being, this is like thrown away like you're trash. And I feel like, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that was a very good point there.
Yeah, that's basically summing up everything. You know, you need to be represented no matter what your case is. And obviously, speaking on that whole reputation thing, when you get released, there's a lot of things that just say, hey, your reputation is not your personality. You live for yourself, but at the same time, people are going to think of you differently, and that's just how it is at the end of the day, based on your actions. And those actions were just chosen, unless you were wrongfully convicted, which happens. It's a thing that just happens. People will never know. People will just assume things about you. That's exactly why it's like your reputation should not be you, but your personality and your rights, the fact that you are alive and have potential at one point, that should definitely just be taken into account. And definitely, they should definitely be felt like they're part of something, because making them feel like dogs or something, just all in a yard, like all in one building, just putting a bunch of dogs, they just make them feel like trash, like rats, all that stuff. And you know, that's why they should be given the right to vote. And that's the same thing. Right now, they're not given the right to vote. And I bet you if they did, it could swing the election in either way. There's no statistics, obviously, because if they're not going to let them vote, they're not going to take statistics on it. It's just how it is.
I like that metaphor you used. That was nice.
Thank you.
So if prisoners did receive the right to vote, do you feel like, so if prisoners were moved from like state to state, do you feel like prisoners should be allowed to, if it does count as electoral vote for the state population instead of being associated with their own prison population, do you feel like the state they were previously or like first imprisoned in should be the state they're voting in, or if they were transferred, should they vote for that state they were transferred to?
Well, obviously, there's going to be some state restrictions depending on what a policy that president makes. The president could say not all states have to allow voters. One would say all of them have to allow voters. If we're going to go off the all of them allow voters, I feel like it'd go both same ways. If you're convicted of a crime in a non-voter state for prisoners, then you're kind of screwed. If you get transferred to a voter state, I feel like you should not be voting for a community that you're just in there for prison. Instead, I feel like you should be voting for the representation of the community that made you commit a crime, because there's no way you just commit a crime out of nowhere. Like, if you live in New York, say, in your entire life, you move to California, let's say, like, a really bad place in LA, already from really bad in the description, you're gonna say, well, this community just it's not good for me. And let's say you just fall off, you're gonna need to commit a crime to get back on, and that's just how it is. There's other ways to do it, but when you don't have that social work, when you're not getting social work funded for these people in multiple occasions, they're just gonna feel the need to give up and just commit a crime. And if they're moved, let's say from their really bad LA place, really bad LA prison, and they get moved to someone like Wisconsin, I don't know where. Let's just put that in a situation. They shouldn't be voting for Wisconsin because they're not representing the crime in Wisconsin. They're representing the crime in LA, right? They're part of the group of that committed crime in LA, and they did it in LA for a specific reason. If they had the criminal mindset all their lives, they would have done something in New York when they lived in New York, obviously. But if you move to a different place and your mindset completely changes based on your surroundings, based on your community, based on expectations as well, there's going to be a lot of things that happen, and there's no way you just feel the motivation to do a crime. It's got to be location based on experiences in a new location, in a location. So if you get moved, it should definitely just be somewhere where uh, you felt the need to commit a crime to get social work and social justice in the community where you just want other people to not make the same mistake.
Yeah, I definitely feel like you should be convicted in the place you reside or the place that you have been residing at for the like the majority of your life, because there can be some like unrealistic like uh, there can be some unrealistic situations, like say you travel to another state just to commit that crime. Like say there's something in that state that you need to go to that specific state in order to commit that crime. I feel like you should be if you were to get the vote, I feel like you should vote from the state that you came from because that's the state you know best.
Exactly. So there's different situations with the whole state moving thing. If you feel the need to commit a crime, let's say me and my current location, Merced, California, yes? Let's say I choose, hey, I need to make a crime because I am not feeling myself and I feel like I need to make something for myself and I'm not getting the social work that I need to be able to improve myself in order to not commit this crime. But you say, I don't want to make this crime in Merced. I want to go to Phoenix, Arizona, and I want to make the crime there. You would be in prison in Phoenix, obviously, because your crime was committed there. But you should definitely be able to vote for the community that made you do it. Because if you're voting for Arizona, but you just chose to go to Arizona out of nowhere, you just said, hey, some unlucky person is just going to be killed by me in Arizona, or they're just going to be tortured, and you're not going to want to vote in Arizona. You're not going to vote for Arizona because you just went there to do a crime. You do not represent the state. You represent where you came from and what made you in the community that you came from. In my case, Merced would be what in this place where I was not giving enough social work to work with or enough like emotional support or enough motivation to do better than commit a crime. It wasn't in Arizona, it was here. But I just chose to go do it somewhere random because I decided my community knows me here, but nobody knows me in Arizona. If you get arrested over there, you should definitely be voting for where it motivated you to the point where you need to make change for that certain community.
Yeah, like say you're already poor where you live. I'm kind of going a different path instead of murder. Say you're poor where you live, and I guess somehow you find the means to travel somewhere else. Like say there's like a bank in a different state, or something that would give you cash. You go there just to commit that crime, and now you have money, but you get caught. Um, that's another instance of like, well, I'm basically just rephrasing what you said.
Yeah, I guess that's where it kind of just ends, where it's like, yeah, if they're gonna do it off of prison population, they should definitely have the right to vote. We already agreed on the fact that they should have the
Yeah.
right to vote, but now the discussion is like where, how. If the prison population work, that's pretty basic, pretty simple, self-explanatory. Prison population doesn't matter where you're from, just vote for it. And the other thing is just state policies. If you commit in a certain state and they decide, hey, we're not gonna go for the prison population, it's gonna be based on just general electoral votes, then yeah, you depend on the state that you felt the need to do it in. Because if they do it in the one where you just represented it, not all of them are going to allow you to vote in prison, first off. And second off, you want to create change for the place that made you feel the need to commit a crime. So that's basically kind of summary of everything.
Yeah.
Any last
Ryan, anything to add on?
yeah. You awake, Ryan?
YOLO.
Yeah, I'm awake. I was just no.
I gotta pee. It's been over an hour. Can we?
That's great.
Yeah, we done here?
The wrong button.
All right, so let's close
Alright.
out the discussion then.
All right, so that's it for the podcast. I would like to thank all three of you guys for coming out today. Technically it's tonight since it's 11:09 p.m., but thank you for taking your time out of your night and hopping on this podcast and